Okay, let's take another look. Let's get back into it. Part two of the unprotected class review and rebuke by Cody Justice in The American Mantle here. We're going to pick up right where we left off with the examples of Jeremy Carl being compromised to liberalism. That's the point that we are getting across with this whole entire article, and with especially these examples that Cody Justice has found in Carl's book, that Jeremy Carl is already surrendered to the project of liberalism. The same project that got us into this mess, Jeremy Carl is surrendered to. He is assuming, he is working from the ideas of liberalism that got us into the anti-white mess that we are currently in. And therefore, Jeremy Carl's book is not an adequate response to the anti-white mess that we're in, because it assumes liberalism. It assumes the liberal axioms that built the system that hates white people. So we cannot tear down the system that hates white people if we assume the foundations of that system. This is a common point that's been made many times and in many ways, but it's very helpful that Cody looks into this with Jeremy Carl's book, because Jeremy Carl is explicitly writing a book about anti-white racism. And that feels like a win, because we have lost so hard for so long that even just talking about it is somewhat of a victory. Because not that long ago, we couldn't even talk about it. We could not talk about it. You could talk about Black Lives Matter, but you could not talk about white lives and if they matter. That was the unspoken taboo of American society, and it's true for the rest of the West as well, just like England, Scotland, Wales, and every other white country is currently killing themselves and replacing themselves with non-whites, because they have also compromised to the anti-white regime that Jeremy Carl here is talking about. So we could be tempted to, enjoy this book and take a victory lap because Jeremy Carl talked about it and people read his book, and wow. And you know what? There's room for that. There is a sense that this is a victory because we had lost so hard, but we cannot be satisfied with that. We have to actually push for the future where white people don't hate themselves and don't surrender to their enemies just because they hate themselves. And Jeremy Carl's project is not good enough because he assumes the liberal system that brought us here. He assumes the liberal ideas that gave us these anti-white hatred. So let's look at some of the examples. This is a tough point to make because Jeremy Carl supposedly is explicitly not doing that. He's trying to expose anti-white racism. So we need to look at some examples. We looked earlier in the previous video about, if the letter W was capitalized in the word white when speaking of white people and what that meant. We looked at him using the term white supremacy in a liberal way. And now let's look here, following along in Cody's article, at the third example. Carl notes the ideological agenda of interracial relationships and friendships in media as a form of racial myth-making. But he doesn't oppose either in themselves, nor as socially imprudent, nor as injurious to national life, solidarity, and cohesion. Instead, he opposes them only insofar as they overrepresent the present, are not popular, and forward an unstated agenda. Carl is not interested, therefore, in particular identity vis-a-vis race, but in what we might call honest representation, honest representative equality of the present, or of what's popular. Presumably, if America were composed of 80% interracial relationships, or if the idea in general were wildly popular, then he would want this reflected proportionately in media displays. He admits the presence of anti-white propaganda, but cannot muster a pro-white response. That's really a great way of summing it up here, that sentence right there. Jeremy Carl admits the presence of anti-white propaganda, but cannot muster a pro-white response. That's basically the summation of Cody Justice's point here. Carl is not trying to be pro-white. He is basically a liberal who wants peace. He wants equality. He wants to stop the anti-white propaganda. He is at core making the liberal argument, which is, why can't we all just get along? Why can't we all just get along? He is against anti-white propaganda, but he doesn't really care to be pro-white. And as Cody said earlier in this article, that isn't actually too surprising because, he's Jewish. He is not white, actually, ethnically. You could say he's white because the color of his skin is white, but if we're talking about American race, the heritage Americans were not Jewish. They were Christian Europeans, primarily English and German. And later there was an admixture of other Christian Europeans, like some of the Catholic countries, the Irish and the Italians, which were slightly further removed and took more to assimilate, but still not as far removed as a Jewish person. So it's not a big surprise to me, and probably not to Cody, that Jeremy Carl doesn't really muster a pro-white response because that's not really fundamentally his group. Maybe eventually it could be his group if he converts to Christianity, which I believe Jeremy Carl has done, and eventually assimilates completely into the American white ethnicity. That is possible. I'm not saying that your DNA precludes you from being part of American white ancestry, because obviously we are a ethnogenesis of Europeans, Germans, English, Scottish, and then Irish and Italian. They can happen, right? But it is also just something deep in you that says, I'm Jewish, and if I go too hard on the pro-white thing, that might exclude myself, right? And that's what Cody goes on to say, much less a distinct white identity rooted in the founding or somewhere subsequent to be embraced, preserved, and protected as essential to and exclusive of American identity. The Jewish identity really wasn't part of the founding of America, or even much subsequent to the founding, at least not for a long time, right? It would have to be somewhere in the 20th century that you finally get to enough Jews coming to America and being part of America that you might say that they are part of the American identity, which you could make that argument, but Jeremy Carl doesn't. He doesn't even make an argument for a white identity or any kind of American identity. He's just saying, stop with the anti-white propaganda. Stop being so mean, guys. Stop being mean. And we see here the rather effeminate, womanish, school marmish quality of the liberal. The liberal is always, don't be so mean. Why are you guys so mean to each other? I remember the quintessential example of this, which I saw in the UK, just always tickles me. It was when a very leftist, liberal white woman who was a member of parliament went down to the Muslim district, because in the Muslim district, they had successfully lobbied to remove LGBT education from the public schools. These were predominantly Muslim public schools, and the Muslim community in the UK had argued that the LGBT education went against their Islamic faith. And of course, this is a big problem for the left, because the left has typically assumed minorities, including Muslims, to be part of their coalition. So what are we going to do? The coalition is infighting, right? And a white liberal woman, member of parliament, went down to the Muslim imams and tried to tell them they were wrong about Islam. I'm not joking. This was her argument. It's on video. The imams and the Muslims are protesting on the street in the UK, and this white woman goes up to them and says, don't you know Islam is a religion of peace? Islam is a religion of peace. That was her argument, which was basically, I, as a non-Muslim white woman, understand your religion better than you do, Islamic scholar. I know it better than you, and it is just liberalism. Don't you know that Muslims are liberals? Was the white woman's argument in the UK, which is, of course, laughable, which is what the Muslims did. They laughed her off. But that's all that the liberal has. Don't be mean. What's up with this anti-white propaganda? Don't you guys know that we're all liberals? Don't you know we all just get along and let anybody do whatever they want? Why can't you just get along? Which, of course, even in that LGBT example, the Muslims were more correct than the liberals because pushing LGBT education on kids is not neutral. It's not just letting people do whatever they want. It's actually pushing an agenda, which is evil and degenerate. And even though I'm far from a Muslim, the Muslims were correct to identify that and to fight back against it because it's not just the pretend liberalism. There is always a drift towards evil. That's just human nature, right? Human nature loves evil and hates the good. We know this because we know we are fallen. We are fallen in our nature until we are saved by Christ, by the Spirit, and born again. So if we're going to build a system based on fallen human nature and there's going to be no rules, just liberalism, just let everybody get along, live and let live, then the entropy of human nature will pull us, will drag us further and further down into evil and degeneracy, because that's what human nature will do unopposed. Pure, raw human nature, pure, raw humanity is evil. And that's something that really gets to the heart of liberalism. The liberal assumes a blank slate, a neutral human nature, or a good. They have also embraced some kind of new age spiritualism that allows them to argue that human nature is at the core good, not evil, which is the full inversion of the truth. So that is actually more popular with the left these days than the blank slate neutral theory, even though maybe academically the blank slate is more defensible. So you may hear it brought up in debate a little bit more often. If you hang out with leftists, what they truly believe is the opposite of the right. It is that humans are basically good. And it's just the big, meanie, oppressive, white, cisgender, heterosexual Christian males that are making everybody so evil. And if we just got rid of the hegemony, if we just attacked the authority, if we just had the communist revolution, however they want to put it, if we just got rid of the people in charge, then everybody would be good, right? If we just allowed human nature to be even more free, even less tied down by laws and rules and moral restrictions, then everybody will be happy. Then everyone will become a poet. I remember hearing this with the universal basic income argument. You know, why should men have to work? We have so much money. These billionaires have hundreds of billions of dollars. It's so unfair. If we just took money from rich people and created universal basic income, then nobody would have to work again. And everybody would be free. And in their freedom, what would they do? They would create art. That's literally what they say. They would create art. They would be poets. We would have a new age, a golden age of artistic expression and beauty, because our artists wouldn't be forced to work at Starbucks. They would have the freedom to go out and do good in the world. This is literally what they believe. So here you can see that their belief is not that humanity is neutral, but that humanity is basically good. Man everywhere is born good, and then he is in chains by the social contract of the evil system of patriarchy and tradition that turned the good man evil. But we know the truth to be the opposite. There are a lot of people in America right now who have basically got universal basic income. They've got welfare. They've got Section 8 housing. They've got food stamps. They've got Social Security. They've got Medicaid and Medicare. They've got pretty much everything that they need. Their life is given to them. And how do they turn out? How do those people turn out? Do they become poets? Do they become scholars? No, they don't. Man is like a child. If you just give the child everything it needs and just give the child everything it wants, does the child become a poet? No. The child becomes a spoiled brat. The child's behavior gets worse and worse and worse until eventually you have parents bringing their children into the child psychiatry clinic for behavior and development to put the children on intense psychotropic medication because of a diagnosis like oppositional defiance disorder, which is a very smart way of saying a spoiled brat. And we can't accept that, of course, because our entire medical system, legal system, social, moral system is based on no, humanity is basically good. So if this child is not behaving well, there must be something chemically wrong with them because children are basically good, right? That's what we believe. That's the core of liberalism. And that's what Jeremy Carl basically believes when he's saying, why can't we just all get along? What's stop it with all this anti-white propaganda? What's up with that? What's up with that? No, we don't want a pro-white response. No. We don't need a pro-white response. That would be kind of racist and bigoted and actually kind of mean to the non-whites, right? So we don't care about that. But we do want to stop with all this anti-white propaganda. That's really bad, That's a problem. This is the inherent contradiction of liberalism that is alive and well in the book, supposedly, that is a stalwart far-right response to the anti-white propaganda from Jeremy Carl. It's not good enough. Cody Justice is very right to identify this core supposition of liberalism that is still animating the book that Carl wrote. It's still animating Carl's work. It's that, why can't we all just get along? Liberalism. Why can't we all just get along? A true Christian understands we can't get along because we are evil. Man must be governed, according to the amazing film Master and Commander. Man must be governed. Man must be governed. And the liberal and the libertarian hate that truth. They war against that truth. They militate against that truth because they are, unfortunately, even though they may be on the right, they're ultimately anti-authoritarian. They do not like authority. They distrust authority. They may not be as revolutionary as the far left, but they are similar to the far left in their distrust of all human authority. And that is a distrust of God, ultimately, because God put human authority over us. God instantiated human authority. God put a father in charge of his wife and his children in the home. Patriarchy means father rule, and that is the correct God-ordained rule for the family. The father is in charge. The father has the ultimate authority over his family. And then there are elders in the church, and the elders carry real authority over the church community. And then eventually the governing elders, the civil magistrate, have real authority over the state, over the people. And that's not evil, that's not wrong, that's not something to be abolished in some libertarian paradise. That is right, that is God ordained. And we cannot try to push for some sort of egalitarian future where everybody just gets along and nobody is mean to each other. And if we just give each other enough money and stuff, then everybody is happy. Because it's impossible and because it's anti-God. God is an authority, and to be anti-authority is ultimately to be anti-God. The Bible says, for us Christians anyways, slaves, obey your masters. Wives, obey your husbands. Children, obey your parents. We are everywhere commanded to obey human authority as unto the Lord, because our obedience to human authority reflects our obedience to God and his divine ultimate authority. I'm gonna leave it there. I didn't get very far in this one, but I've already had a long video, so looks like we'll have to do a couple parts on this series, but hopefully that is helpful to you. Hopefully we can continue to identify and root out the evil of egalitarian liberalism wherever we find it, so that one day we can actually muster a pro-white response or just a pro-American response, something that says we can have an identity. We're allowed to have an identity. We're allowed to have it. We are not wrong as white people or as Americans or maybe as Christians or as heterosexuals or as cisgenders or as men or whatever form of identity is currently under attack. It is not wrong to have our identity. We can defend our identity. It is just and right to defend our identity, not just to point out anti-white bigotry, but to muster a defense of the identity that God has given to us in his good will. I pray that's helpful to you. In Jesus' name, amen.